able to make it tonight. I'm excited for tonight. So just so that everybody's aware, we are recording the presentation. We will have a Q&A time at the end of the night that we will shut off the recording for. So if you have questions, you can feel free to ask freely. Tonight's conversation is not going to be a lighthearted conversation. It is going to be a little heavy, or a lot heavy, and that's okay. We need to have conversations like this, but it's an important conversation. Human trafficking is not something that is okay, and so we need to do what we can to be aware of it and to raise our awareness of it so that we can be on the lookout for people who need our help. Because how many of you know, as a community, we need to be helping hurting people in our community? Like, that's what a community does. It reaches out and helps those who are hurting. And so we need to do our part as a community. And so it's not okay to ignore a problem, because that doesn't mean it's not happening. And sadly, this problem is pervasive enough that the likelihood is that it is happening in the edge of the wilderness area. So, if you don't know who I am Bryan Boone. I pastor Bigfork Assembly of God, that's my day job, and then I have a secondary hat that I wear in town. I'm the mayor of Bigfork, and so I get the privilege of serving this amazing community. But I wanted to just take a moment to introduce those guests that we have with us tonight. First, in just a moment, we're going to be hearing from my friend Caleb Monson. I'll introduce him more formally in just a moment. Then he's going to hand it off to Mark Greiner. He is an investigator with the Itasca County Sheriff's Office, and he has been a member of the Human and Sex Trafficking Task Force with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension for 6 years. I made it through without stumbling. And then we're going to hear from Sherry Shadley. She is a supervisor for Itasca and Aiken County with the Support Within Reach organization. She has been working with them for about 5 years. You can find more about their organization at supportwithinreach.org. And then Caleb Monson, he works with Free International, as you can see on the screen here. Freeinternational.org is their website if you need more information or want to find out more about what they do. Also on their websites, you can go and you can give to their organization to help further this cause and fight human and sex trafficking. So he's been working with Free International for a little over 2 years now. He does community training and school assemblies. He hails from New York Mills, and he's been an advocate for victims, and he raises awareness for human and sex trafficking. And so if you would, welcome Caleb Monson.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's so great to be with all of you guys tonight up in Bigfork. As Brian said, I'm from the Wadena area, New York Mills, for those that are aware of where that is, about 3 hours south and west of here, right? Yeah, southwest. And so that's where I'm from. I drove up this evening to share with you about this important topic that we are here to discuss. To introduce you to my family, because I think that's important. I have an adorable puppy at home, and my wife, Brittany. My watch is trying to tell me what to say here, but that's my wife Brittany and my dog Willow. And so a little bit about us is we are full-time missionaries right here in the U.S., and sometimes that's a weird term to be a U.S.-based missionary, but what that means is we dedicate our life to fight human trafficking full-time. And the fun part about that is we don't get paid to do it. We get to raise our funds and through people and businesses and truly just dedicate every area of our life to fight this. How do we do it? A couple different areas is we do school assemblies, which is one of my favorites, to speak to a room full of students and just empower them to know and to be aware, as well as we look for missing kids in big cities and also do community outreaches like this. But I know you're here tonight not to know what I do for a job, but to hear about what is human trafficking. And I want to talk to you about that tonight, obviously, the idea of when you think of the terms human trafficking, I want you to think of what comes to mind for you. The images, maybe the videos that you've seen, the things that you've learned throughout your life, what comes to mind for you? And if we were to go around the room tonight and ask every single person, I believe that every single person would have a very different definition. And let's ask these folks because they're experts up here. But the definitions that come to our mind are oftentimes based on what we've learned and maybe experienced in life of what human trafficking is. And a big part of my presentation tonight is to debunk some of the misconceptions that maybe we have of what human trafficking exists to be. And some of you in the room have got your 3-year degree from Taken. Anyone seen all 3 movies and want to admit it? Okay, a couple honest people in the room. But the idea of Taken, and if you don't know the movie, it's a movie about Liam Neeson's daughter gets taken and abducted. And they spent a lot of time trying to figure out the name of the movie, obviously. But it's this movie where his daughter is taken and sold in human trafficking. And if Liam Neeson's your dad, you don't have to worry about a thing, okay? He will find them and he will kill them, right? If you know the movie at all. But our idea of human trafficking for some of us is somebody being kidnapped and taken from Bigfork or Grand Rapids or wherever you're from and sold across the country or sold in a whole other country. And although that does happen from time to time, majority of human trafficking does not happen through abductions and kidnappings on the street. Even though that's what our mind immediately goes to. As kidnappings and abductions are something generally a little different than human trafficking. And some of you got your 4-year degree, many of us in this room actually, got our 4-year degree from Facebook.com. Anybody? Spend a little too much time on Facebook. I will admit to that myself. And everything we know about human trafficking, maybe for you, came from Facebook. Anybody have a crazy Aunt Betty? And if that's your name, I'm sorry. But anybody have a crazy Aunt Betty that shares everything she sees on Facebook as it's the gospel truth? And it's like a lost dog photo from 2005, and you're like, Grandma, the dog's not missing anymore, right? Or whatever, or the fun thing about politics, everything on Facebook is true, right? But what we see on Facebook, I came across, what's kind of fun is when you work in this full time, people tag you and stuff all the time about this stuff. And this is one that I came across recently on Facebook, and you've maybe seen this, but a human trafficking warning. Beware a car seat sitting in a mall parking lot. And it's a story, usually a longer story than this, the idea, like if you go and check that car seat, because most mothers, you're like, oh my goodness, there's a baby. And so your motherly instincts kick in, right? And the idea is you're going to go check out the car seat, and the idea is that traffickers are going to kidnap you and take you. Generally, that is not human trafficking in the U.S. And although maybe there's a few cases like that that happen, it's not what it looks like. A few others that I've seen is a hubcap sitting next to your car. And you're going to walk around your car to make sure it's not your hubcap, and when you do, you're going to be taken and abducted. But tonight I want to talk about what is human trafficking. What does it actually look like? Because I think for us to be aware of something and think it's happening over here and have the wrong misconceptions allows it to exist right in front of us and never even realize it. Something that exists, but instead we're too busy looking over here at what it isn't. And so, what is human trafficking? It's not generally kids chained in a basement. It's not generally kids tied in ropes or handcuffs. But rather, it looks a lot different. To give you the legal definition, anyone love legal definitions? Okay, there's no lawyers in the room, apparently. But sex trafficking, this is the generalized legal definition that's used in, I believe, all 50 states. But sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, providing, or obtaining of a person for a commercial sex act, in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion. Those are the 3 most important words in any trafficking case. Force, fraud, or coercion. Or, this is a big or to understand, in which the person induced to perform such an act is not at least 18 years of age. That big or is a very important word, and this is why. If it is a minor, there doesn't have to be proved every single time force, fraud, or coercion. But a minor forced to perform these sex acts is all it takes. Where if it's an adult, the reason is there's a legal, not legal, but there's never a legal or a legitimate situation for a child to be a prostitute. Right? A child cannot choose for themselves one day, I'm going to go and be a prostitute at age 15. There's no actual ability for a child to choose that. For an adult, they can make that choice legitimately. Now, is it legal? No, that's a whole other conversation. But for children, it's a lot easier to prove a trafficking case because you don't have to define all of that. Labor trafficking, I'm not going to bore you with reading the exact same definition, other than the fact that what is committed is work and not a commercial sex act, okay? Labor trafficking happens in this country as well. Sex trafficking gets the most screen time, it gets the most microphone time because it's probably a whole lot more prevalent, but it's also existing in our country, in our state too, where people are forced to work and they don't make hardly any money. And they're forced to work long hours, and they're forced to pay off debts that they owe, and maybe they're forced to live at the establishment that they work as well. To define for you what is force, fraud, or coercion, this is just an example, a plethora of situations where maybe one of these things happens to a trafficking victim. Under force, obviously kidnapping is on there. Does it happen? Yes. Torture, battering, threats with weapons is a very prevalent one with traffickers. There's usually guns involved, there's usually weapons that they're threatened with. Sexual abuse, obviously, is a very common one with trafficking situations. Confinement, forced use of drugs is a big one, and the list goes on. Fraud is a big one as well, they all are. But promises of valid immigration documents is pretty prevalent when it comes to international victims, where they're promised, hey, I'll give you U.S. citizenship, we'll get you to be a legal citizen, you just have to come to this country, and when they arrive, that's none of what they get, as they're forced to live where they work or where they're being exploited. And continue on down the list, victims told to use false papers. So again, this is just a long laundry list of things that might happen. Promises of money or salary. Always promise that they're going to make really good money. You just got to do this, we got to go sell you this weekend and we're just going to make really good money, but the money never stays with them. Wooing into romantic relationships is one of the most common in our experience with teenagers, where they'll have what's considered a boyfriend. And they're usually a little older than they should be. Maybe the victim's 15 and the boyfriend's 23, 25, or whatever it might be. And they're dating, and it's this relationship, and he says that he loves her, whatever it might be. But pretty soon it turns to where, if you love me, we have bills to pay. And so you need to go sell yourself in order to pay for those, whatever it might be. And so that is a big one that is used with vulnerable teenagers. As we look at coercion, debt bondage is another big one. If you especially are an international victim, they paid your way to get to America, and now you owe them $5,000 for the transportation, for everyone that they had to pay off, whatever the story is. And not only that, but they're allowing you to live somewhere, they're feeding you occasionally, and now you owe that interest back as well. And so though you are selling yourself multiple times a day, you will never pay off that debt bondage, because they hold it over you and the interest is crazy high. So again, going down the list, a big one is threats of harm to the victim or family. These victims have seen what these traffickers are capable of. They have been at the brunt of abuse themselves. They have often been beat as all this stuff has happened. And so when traffickers say, if you ever leave, I will go do this to your sister, or I will find your parents, I know where your parents live, victims think twice, because they know it's not just a false promise. And so continuing on down the list, controlled communication, where you can't text, you can't call without them allowing you to. And farther down on that list is the holding of the IDs and travel documents. If you're a traffic victim, your driver's license and passport is generally going to be held from you because you can't go anywhere. You can't travel, you can't get on a plane, you can't leave, especially, like I said, international victims. There was a case down in Mississippi where one of our team members trained the state patrol down there. And after a training, about a month later, there was an accident on the interstate, and ambulances come and all this different stuff. And there was 3 girls and a guy in the car. The guy was in the passenger seat. And there was a situation where he had to be taken to the hospital. He had bad stuff going on. And they went to cut off his pants because he broke his legs or whatever. And in the cargo pocket of his shorts or pants or whatever he was wearing was the driver's licenses of the other 3 girls in the car. And because the law enforcement had been trained recently, they remembered, why does a guy have the control of the other 3 girls' driver's license? Well, sure enough, as the investigators looked deeper and deeper, they realized what was going on is that guy was trafficking those 3 girls. So again, just red flags that may exist. Control the victim's money is all the time. They will never control their money. And when I go to Las Vegas, like 10 times a year, you'll see where girls will come down from a casino in the elevator, and the guy is waiting at the bottom of the elevator, and immediately they hand them the money from whatever they just got paid for the abuse that they endured. And so control the money all the time. As we look at trafficking and this idea, some of us have this idea that trafficking is kind of a problem in the U.S. I argue it is a major problem in the U.S. that many people are not aware of. As we look at the crime of trafficking, trafficking is the second largest criminal activity in the world. It is huge. It's not just, again, a little bit of a crime. Number one is drugs, and number three is illegal arms. Some people will say that trafficking will surpass the trade of illegal drugs. Every person has their own opinion. Generally, I'm going to say drugs will continue to prevail because trafficking and drugs go hand in hand. And so also one thing to understand about trafficking is I want you to think, and you probably already read my screen, so it's cheating, but I want you to think of when you think of the bad guys of human trafficking. Every one of us thinks of the traffickers, right? We think of the guys that are forcing, and girls, by the way, it's not just male traffickers, women do it too, that are forcing these victims to do what they do. But I want you to realize that the guys in our own communities, and it's largely men, that are exploiting these women, children, and boys, they're just as much a criminal as the traffickers. Because the reality is if we could eliminate, and it'll never happen, but if we could eliminate the demand of human trafficking, I could go work at McDonald's or something, and it'd be a lot stressful, right? We'd probably put this guy out of work or something, and you'd have to do something else. But if we could eliminate the demand of human trafficking, if we could, the men in our communities that are exploiting these children and women, that's as much of a criminal as well. Oftentimes at the end of these trainings, as I talk with parents and grandparents, and especially the grandmas, they're like, I'm never letting my grandkids ever leave the house again because of what's happening in this world. Who is at risk? Who is the most likely people to be trafficked? I always say everyone is at risk of being trafficked, but I backed it up with not everyone. So who is really at risk of being trafficked? Trafficking revolves around one very simple word called vulnerabilities. Traffickers, when they are identifying potential victims, the only thing that they have to find in a potential victim is a vulnerability. Something that as a trafficker they can leverage and say, whatever you need, I can give you. Whatever that person is short of, I can make it happen. You need somewhere to stay, I can exploit that. You need food at the end of the day, I can exploit that. You need love. Vulnerable teenagers looking for love in all the wrong places. And pretty soon somebody on Facebook or TikTok or whatever it might be messaging them, and pretty soon they're talking to somebody and falling in love with somebody that they don't know. In 2020, the statistics came out that 60% of convicted or found cases of trafficking in children, 60% was through Facebook alone. And that amazes me, that statistic, because most of our teenagers aren't on Facebook. They're too cool for it, right? They're on Instagram and TikTok. But the most common way for victims to be found is through this device right here. So for the parents in the room, the grandparents that are like, I will never let my kid go to the mall or go anywhere with friends again, I wouldn't be as worried about that as I would about what's happening on here, about who's talking to them. And for the teenagers in the room, they're like, I hate you right now. But the reality is, what's happening on the phone when no one knows who's they're talking to. I had a student that I had invested a lot of time into in my former job, and I remember she was telling me, almost bragging, that she was friends with a couple hundred people on Snapchat she had never met. And I'm like, do you realize how dangerous that is? Do you realize what you're setting yourself up for? So who is at risk of being trafficked? Vulnerable people. Any vulnerability, and I will get to this again at the end, but the best way for a community to fight trafficking, the best way for you as a person to fight trafficking, is to eliminate vulnerabilities in your community. Of finding those teenagers that need somebody to just pour their life into. Of finding those single moms that just need somebody to invest their life into, of helping out neighbors, of watching out for those people. So who's at risk? The people with the most vulnerabilities. The other emphasis is it's worse than you realize. This map identifies, if you can't read from in the back of the room, every dark gray county was identified by law enforcement to have at least one sex buyer within that county. This map is from 2019. As you see, Itasca County is highlighted on that map. And the other thing you'll realize is most of Minnesota is highlighted on that map. So the idea that it can't be happening in my own community, right? Small towns. I grew up in Wadena, small town of 4,000 people. It can't be happening in small towns. It can't be happening around me because I think we all like to believe that because we can go to bed tonight a lot easier. Not having to think about what's happening in our own towns. Now it's not having to think about what's happening to our own students. So it's worse than you realize. It's happening all over the place. I always get this question of why do victims stay with their trafficker? As we look at trafficking all around the country, especially I specialize in the U.S., I don't really leave the country. But why do victims stay? We a lot of times think, and many of you in the room would think this, when an officer shows up to a trafficking victim situation, you would think that trafficking victim would run across the parking lot and hug the officer and say, "Thank you so much for finding me." Do you experience that?
Nope.
Exactly. And that's crazy for a lot of us, but they're there to help, and it doesn't make sense. And so why do victims stay? We're going to go through a couple different things. Number one, there is a stigma that they are damaged goods. When you have been in that situation, you've been sold night after night, and many times victims, especially in bigger cities, have a quota to be sold 10 to 15 times a night. 10 to 15 times a night they will be sold every night of their life. Thanksgiving is coming up, doesn't matter. It's another day to be sold. Christmas doesn't matter. You're being sold that night too. So they're stigmatized as damaged goods. No one else in the world cares about me. They probably don't have a parent that is involved in their life, whatever their story is. I am just damaged goods. I've gotten myself into this situation. It is the thought process. It's the idea that no one else in the world even cares enough. We were down in Vegas back in February of this year, quick story, and looking for missing kids. And there was one kid that kind of through a miraculous story. If I had 2 more hours, I would share the whole thing with you. But the miraculous story, we find her through a lot of different details. And she's sitting outside some of our mobile units as we are doing intake interviews with police and social workers and all that stuff. And she looks at one of our team members and asks 2 big questions. Is everyone here for me? And we're like, yes, that's what we dedicate our life to find missing kids. And the next question was, the next statement, I didn't know anyone cared enough to look for me. A young 15-year-old girl that didn't think anyone in the world was coming for her. That anyone in the world even knew that she was missing. And also to think that no one would care enough to look for a girl that was being victimized like that. Religious and cultural beliefs, certain, if people are part of certain religious or whatever it might be, they might think my parents will never accept me because of what has happened to me or whatever it might be in that situation. A big one for internationals is threats of deportation. No matter what, for a lot of these victims, whatever they're experiencing, more than likely they're experiencing something similar in the country that they're from. As gangs prevail in El Salvador and all those situations, these things happen. And so for these victims, they say, although I'm dealing with all this stuff happening to me, I don't want to be deported and sent back to where I came from. And they don't know that there's protections for them. There's certain things that can be done for them so they won't be deported. But so that's a huge one. Again, document confiscation, debt bondage, a lot of it we have already gone through. But why do they stay? Drug addiction. If you are addicted to drugs, whether you already were and that was your vulnerability that was leveraged against you, or now you're addicted to drugs just to make it through the next day of being sold and victimized, it's the only place you're getting your drugs from. So now I'm going to stay, I'm going to go through what I need to in order to get the next hit or whatever it might be. Fear of being charged with a crime. Trafficking victims commit a lot of crimes when they're being trafficked because it's survival. They'll steal stuff from the CVS just to survive. They'll steal a candy bar or necessary products that they need. They're going to do whatever they need. So there's all these crimes that they don't want to be charged with. So a lot of times that's what has to do with it. And another one, this is a messed up one for a lot of us in healthy situations, but losing the only support structure they have. A lot of these victims, some of them maybe came through our foster care system or whatever happened, whatever their story was. They don't have a family to go back to. They don't have anyone in the world that they're connected to because they've been so isolated by their trafficker. They haven't been talking to anyone. They can't text anyone. And so they're in this situation where they have a trafficker that in their mind takes care of them. That occasionally will feed them, that will occasionally buy them things. And not only that, but there is 4 other girls that are also being victimized with them as well, that are kind of like their sisters. It's kind of their own little family, and for them, that's their support structure. That's the family, that's all that they know. Another slide of why do victims stay if they're pregnant, or if for whatever reason the trafficker is a parent of the child that they have. They don't want to lose their child. Also, control of the child is another big one. They might not even have access to their kids. We've had victims that we've recovered that haven't seen their kids in 4 months. Because for them, if they ever leave, they'll never see their kid again. So again, another control. Some more things on there. Lack of housing. They don't know that there's anywhere else to live. There's nothing else for them to turn to. They don't know of resources. And to be honest, there isn't nearly enough housing to start with for victims. There's a few shelters in Minnesota, but again, there's not nearly enough for what we need for these trafficking victims. Victims become desensitized. For them, it's just normal. It's just a Tuesday. It's just what they do to survive. It's nothing new for them. And the last two things I'm going to talk about is romantic relationship. If that's your boyfriend, and they love you because they said that they love you, for them, that is their boyfriend. And a lot of times they'll actually refer to their traffickers as that. That's my boyfriend. And when you're talking with them. And the last thing is trauma bonding. My wife is a mental health therapist, so she has taught me all about this. But when you experience trauma with other people, even if it is a trafficker as well as the girls or boys you're being trafficked with, you bond with them. You've been through the same traumatic experience. And also Stockholm Syndrome, everyone know what that is? Most people, for those that don't, it's usually talked about in kidnapping. When children are kidnapped and they spend 2 years with their kidnapper, when they are found, a lot of times they will want to go back with their kidnapper, not their own parents. Because for them, traumatic things happen and they are now connected emotionally with them. One important thing, again, a misconception of trafficking. I always love and hate seeing these articles. You'll see articles about truck driver involved in human trafficking investigation, and I don't know the story of this specific article, but you'll see them come out, especially in the hot summertime of summer down in Texas and all the states down there. And a truck driver will drive 60 people through the border, and for whatever reason he gets spooked or whatever happens, he just leaves the semi, and like 60 people die in the back of the semi-trailer. You know, remember these stories? Like every year there's always some that come out. And a lot of news articles will call this human trafficking. And one of my pet peeves is calling it human trafficking because there's a very big difference between human trafficking and human smuggling, and that is this. For smuggling, the crime is against the citizens of the country, right? It's our inability to regulate the public safety of our country, the U.S. Okay, that's the crime. For trafficking, it's going to be a crime against the individual themselves. They are being victimized, they are being sold. Another big one is smuggling. The victim, or not even the victim, but the person is complicit. They're usually in on it. They will pay the $1,000 to whoever it needs to be to get them across the border into the U.S. For trafficking victims, we don't necessarily know if they were a part of it at any time or if they were completely forced the whole time. Also, smuggling is a one-time interaction. When that semi-driver gets you across the state and the border, then all of a sudden that's it. They never see you again. Where a trafficking victim, they will be with their trafficker and sold night after night. And the last thing is smuggling is focused on transportation, where for trafficking it is focused on the denial of liberty, okay? So next time you see those articles that Aunt Betty shares about human trafficking situation, just know that there is a big difference. And also that's another big misconception I want to just talk about briefly. The word trafficking makes us, like in the back of our mind, believe that somebody has to be brought somewhere. Like I always feel bad for people in white vans. They're just working people, right? It's just a work van. They need to get different colors or something. But trafficking does not need anyone to be brought from Bigfork to Las Vegas. A lot of trafficking victims are actually sold in their own town, in the own community that they will live in. They don't have to be transported anywhere. And many times even trafficking victims will be exploited in their own house, in their own bedroom, where they're meant to be safe, by a lot of times somebody that's supposed to keep them safe. See, a lot of the cases that we work throughout the U.S., especially rural, is a lot of times a mom or a dad has a drug habit they can't afford. And eventually we had a case down in Joplin, Missouri in 2019. 10th grade, a senior. He comes at the end of a school assembly and says, "Hey, I want to talk to your team in the hallway." And he begins to tell us his story is that he's actually been trafficked since age 10. For the last 7.5 years, his mom has been selling him at the truck stops in Joplin, Missouri to pay for her drugs because she's had a drug habit all her life. She couldn't afford it, and so all of his life she was selling herself until age 10. And she no longer had enough teeth, the drugs had gotten too bad, and no one would buy her. So he says, I remember the first night my mom came back to the car, I thought we were going home. And instead, she said, Stephen, I need you to come with me. And his own mom sold him at a truck stop that night to a trucker. He says, I remember vividly what it looked like, a red truck, and he can explain it as you can imagine. And for the last 7.5 years at that point, he had been sold by his own mother. I don't understand how you can get to that point as a parent, to harm the person that you're supposed to take care of. Really quick, as I'm almost wrapping up here, I want to go through a couple red flags that you can look for in people. If you're involved in school and they have a lot of unexplained absences, more than likely something more is going on at home. Not every time is it trafficking, but something else is going on. Why are they not showing up? Have they all of a sudden changed their usual attire? We all know the story of like when a girl breaks up at like 15 with their love of their life. You know, their boyfriend that they were going to marry at age 15, and they like dye their hair and change. You guys all know that story, right? You see someone with the new dye of hair, like, oh, they broke up with their boyfriend. But it can also be if all of a sudden all their attire changes, something happened in their life. All joking aside. And so in kind of understanding what's happening, and this has to do a lot more with people that you know personally. Does a student have more expensive possessions? If you look at somebody like, why do you have a Gucci purse or whatever the thing is these days? Why do you have those expensive things? More than likely something has changed, and so somebody is providing those for them. Do they run away from home chronically? Kids don't just run away for the fun of it. They're either running to something or away from something. So understanding that. Also, are they acting fearful, anxious, depressed? Are they acting paranoid because something might be happening in their life? Another one, especially for law enforcement, is when the individual defers all questions to the person that they're with. If there's an individual that isn't willing to answer a single question, that's probably because that person is controlling them to the point where they can't even answer their own questions. They're going to be super intimidated. Do they show signs of abuse, restraint, that kind of a thing? Have they been deprived of food, which is super common, sleep, that kind of stuff? And again, the ID portion of it as well. Do they have a boyfriend or girlfriend that's noticeably older? Red flag, even if it's not trafficking, right? They shouldn't have somebody that's noticeably older. This one's harder in the day that we live in, but are they engaging in increasingly promiscuous behavior? Or making references to things that they shouldn't know about, like a 12-year-old talking about certain things. You're like, why do you know about this? To be aware of that. And then I'm going to go through this because I don't want to take their time. But a big one is conflicting stories. They're not going to always have the same stories. Do you know what age every single trafficking victim will tell you that they are? 18. Every single one of them. Doesn't matter if you're like, dude, you're 14, barely. They've been trained to tell you that. They will always resist cooperation with law enforcement. And this is my disclaimer, so I do not get sued, and also to protect you. If you are not law enforcement, you should never intervene with a situation of trafficking. Allow the law enforcement to do that. I even do that. I don't roll in and just operate on my own. And also doing that would put you and the victim at risk. So what can you do? Put this number in your phone number, or in your phone. This is an important phone number to have. This is the National Human Trafficking Hotline that you can call, and you can, even if you're like, I don't know what the situation is, but I think something's weird, you can call this number. It's 24 hours a day, and they can help you out and allow you to know what to do, as well as they can then pass it on to the local law enforcement and do that. And that's just more about it. They're 24 hours a day, and they speak 172 languages. That is 171 more than I can. So they got that. But with that, I'm going to pass it over to the investigator that has a lot more local knowledge of what's happening in this county and what he's experienced over his years of seeing all the stuff you've seen. So, okay.
Good evening. My name is Mark Greiner. I'm an investigator with Itasca County. I've been in law enforcement now I'll be finishing my 31st year, starting my 32nd year. I kind of took on around 2004, 2005, and that time started taking on victim crimes as kind of my passion. Did a lot with domestics at that time. Primarily handled family domestic situations and relationships, and through that training I moved on to working with sexual crimes. And then in the past 6 years, I've been privileged to become a part of the Minnesota BCA Human and Sex Trafficking Task Force. Itasca County stepped up to the plate There was 2 of us that were sent down to go through the training and become part of the task force. Unfortunately, one of them has left, so I'm now by myself up here. But I do have the BCA agents that I can call at any time that I can get to come and help me in investigations. So what does that look like? Well, in my career so far, I've had encounters up here in our county without doing any type of special ops. I personally have been involved with 6 victims. Have I gotten any prosecutions? No. You know why? Because they're afraid. They're afraid to point a picture. They're afraid to point the finger because they don't know what's going to happen to them because they've already been a victim so long. But I look at it as that if I can help somebody get out of that situation and change their life and get them safe and away from what's going on in their life, that's a win in my book. I've done my job. I don't care whether or not somebody gets prosecuted as a trafficker. I would rather save somebody from that horror and that fate and let them move on with their life and get them the services they need to put all of this behind them to go on and have as normal of a life as they can. However, they've lived through so much tragedy already, it's really hard to live normal from then on. One of the victims that I dealt with took me 18 months of working with her to finally get her to make a choice to leave the area and move away. But it wasn't until after she got pregnant from her trafficker and had a child with him that she became extremely feared and said, I need to leave. And so I made those connections with services to get her out of here. Again, I've had different people that have come to me and say, you know, I just need help. Okay, what do you want me to do? What do you need? That's all it's asking. That's all we need to do is, what do you need? Unfortunately, law enforcement, we kind of have a stigma. When we show up to something, we kind of got the macho, we got the badge, we got the big vest on, and we come in and we act all tough. But you can't act tough to a trafficker because that's what they've been dealing with their whole life. We have to come in with sympathy and empathy and show them that we care. And that's kind of why I've taken this role. And so, what does that look like moving forward of me trying to handle investigations versus doing something with the state? Well, we do things that we have 2 different operations that we do. We have victim recovery, where we'll do ops. The sole purpose of what we do is to set up ops to get in touch with the victim and offer them services. Just like in domestic violence, they probably won't accept that help the first time. Probably won't accept it the 3rd time. Usually takes them 3, 4, up to 7 times, usually nationally, for them to finally realize I need to make a change. And they'll step up and ask for help. But don't come in here and say we're going to arrest you for prostitution. We're not going to arrest you and put you in jail. We're here to help you. What kind of medical services do you need? What kind of housing do you need? What can we do for you? So that's one of the big things we do as a victim recovery. Again, the biggest thing is trying to find those underage kids, under 18. But again, we want to protect everybody. We do recover adults also that are in this life. Then we do demand reduction. That's to arrest the people who want. As Caleb said, if we can get rid of the people who desire and want this, there won't be anything for them to buy. Now, they've all said that prostitution is one of the oldest industries in the world because it started way back when, but that still doesn't make it right. And so we don't believe, over the years, they used to arrest females and victims for prostitution, thinking that's how we're going to get them the help. But as soon as they get out, they fall right back into it because they've been punished. Well, a lot of these people that have been victimized through trafficking, they don't need to be re-victimized by a court system. We need to give them the helping hand to recover them. And as you look at his title of Free, you'll see that that's what it talks about, is empowering them and getting them to restructuring their life. And that's what this is about. It's recovering them, helping them. So we've done an op here in Itasca County. Maybe some of you heard about it, some of you didn't. When the pipeline was coming through, we ran an op out of just south of Grand Rapids out in the country. We used a residence instead of a motel, and we did it for 2 full days. We had approximately, with everybody involved, took about 65 men and women to be a part of this op. We ran it for 2 days, and we made 11 arrests in 2 days. 9 that were people from out of the state, 2 were within Itasca County residents. And we had contact with 1 victim and tried to get her services. So we've been successful locally, but even in the region, I think if you look back, there was a op that was done in Duluth, and I believe one of our area doctors was arrested in the op down in Duluth. So it's here. But again, as Caleb said, what does a trafficker look like? Everybody says, well, a trafficker of some people who are being sold for sex, that's a pimp, right? So everybody thinks of the guy all dressed up in the big suit, gold chains, big brim hat, driving the big Cadillac. It could be as simple as, he explained, mom, dad. And one of the biggest problems that we see in today, especially with, as he brought up, he talked about so much good stuff, he stole my thunder, that these things are, in children's hands, these things are absolutely the worst you can even give them. And I'm going to have Caleb play me a quick video here. Oblivious. I'll have him pull a quick little video. It's real short, but and we'll use that to explain a little bit more as to why. But even today, one of the biggest problems we have is in the dating world of high school. Do you realize that there are boyfriends that are trafficking their girlfriends almost on a daily basis? You know what that looks like? That looks like boyfriend, girlfriend, they want to attend a party, but he can't go buy beer because he's too young. But he's got somebody that will, but he'll only do it if he can get somebody to have sex with him. So he goes to his girlfriend and says, I got somebody to buy beer, but all you got to do is have sex with him, and then we can get our beer. And so what does she do? Wanting to fit in and go party and have a good time. She goes and has sex with this person, that person goes and buys the beer. That's trafficking. That's as simple as that. And it happens daily. So when you look at that video and you first start watching it, what are the signs as a parent that you saw that you maybe should have intervened? What was the first signs? Anybody? Slamming the laptop down. Absolutely. What are you doing if you're working on schoolwork? Why are you hiding schoolwork? What are you doing that you're trying to hide? Second thing that happened, what was the next one?
Well, the kid after just to go away, you were alone.
What's that? Yep. The kids just get out of my way, or get out of here. I'm fine. Get out of here. I'm fine. Next thing is, how many times have you been over to Jessica's house to do homework? Really? Kind of odd. So those are just some signs and things that, as a parent, that you recognize. The other thing as a parent, when you have somebody in your house that's under the age of 18 and they have electronics, who pays the bill? You or them? Who has access and rights to those phones? You or them? So there's nothing that they should be hiding on these phones, or nothing they're doing on their phones that should be trying to keep secret, unless they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. So those are signs just to keep aware and step up. The other thing is you saw how fast he went on, found an ad, put it on there, set it up within, 15, 20 minutes, maybe half hour, that whole thing was set up. So I was just at the yearly sex trafficking conference this last week, and so we decided to see how fast and how many responses we would get at our training. So we set up a fake post on last Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, we sent out the post that we were in the Breezy Point, Nisswa area and ready and available. And by 11:30, we had 15 responses looking to respond back to that ad that took place. It happens that fast, that quick, in rural towns, rural communities. It isn't just the big cities, it's everywhere. And as Caleb did state, again, this is the second largest illegal industry in the world. So for those of us that think that it's not happening here and we're not seeing any prosecutions from here, It's here. And again, my goal is help victim. If I can get a trafficker, if I can prosecute them, I will. But my number one priority, and I think Caleb's the same thing, is victim recovery is first and foremost, recover the victim, get them safe, and then if we can build something from there to get somebody convicted, all the better. But it takes more than just us. It takes an army. On things that you've been involved with, it takes an army. And every op that I've been on, there's been 65 to 70 officers that get tied up for 2 days. That's 2 of our whole departments tied up for 2 days to do an op to get 11 arrests. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the victim's advocate, Sherry Shadley from Support Within Reach. My cards are on the table. Feel free. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, certainly ask when we're done tonight. But if you want to even be more private because you think this isn't a place that you want to communicate with or talk about, I work 7 days a week. If I don't answer, please leave a message and a phone number and I'll return your call. And I thank you for allowing us to come into your community and give this, as he said, tough topic to talk about because it's not fun. So thank you. Sherry?
Well, I gotta say, I gotta feel a little bit like a wet blanket because I don't have a PowerPoint, I don't have a video, all I have is facts. So as Mark introduced me, I'm with Support Within Reach, which is a sexual violence resource center. We actually are in 6 counties in northern Minnesota. We're one of the largest and oldest sexual assault programs in the state of Minnesota with active programs and staff in Itasca, Aiken, Cass, Clearwater, Hubbard, what am I forgetting? Beltrami. How could I forget that? So, as both Caleb and Mark have talked about, sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, particularly among kids who are under the age of 18, is a very pervasive problem. And it happens in every community of any size, at any moment of any time, of any day, in any state or country. There are legal protections for youth who are caught up in the life, as many talk about. In Minnesota, we have the safe harbor laws. Basically, we are recognizing as a state that young people who are being sexually exploited need understanding, they need support, they need services, as Mark has talked about. And they need to know that they're going to be safe in trying to get out of and get away from people who are exploiting their vulnerabilities. So with the safe harbor laws, that is a state law that protects and helps young people. If you are under the age of 24, the law can help you get services to meet your needs like housing, transportation, legal help, counseling. Again, that's kind of looking at the bigger picture, getting out of the life, so to speak. For anyone that has been trafficked or exploited that is 18 and younger, Safe Harbor protects you from being prosecuted for crimes that occurred in the act of being exploited. So what does exploitation mean? The definition is sexual exploitation happens when anything of value or a promise of value, like money, drugs, food, a safe place to stay, or in some cases a higher status in a gang, that is given to you or another person in exchange for any type of sexual act. So just to kind of localize the problem, every year we have what's called the high school student survey, and that every child in every high school in our state participates in a very lengthy survey that talks about all sorts of issues that they've been exposed to. So like the survey talks about, have you ever smoked? Have you ever tried smoking? Have you tried vaping? Have you ever used marijuana? Have you drank? If so, how often? And it gives kids the opportunity to anonymously report on what type of activities that they've been involved in. One of the questions in that survey is specifically about exploitation and trafficking, where they ask, have you ever traded some type of sexual favor or act in exchange for food, a safe place to stay, a phone or technology, money, transportation, so on and so forth. Across the state, on average, the positive responses to that question have ranged around 1.7 to 1.8%. Unfortunately, in northern Minnesota, we rank highest, and we're at, on average, about 2.1%. So that seems like a small percentage in the grand scheme of things, 2.1 compared to 100%. But this is just kids that answered that question honestly. Many kids don't answer that question, or they lie about it. Because again, their safety is being threatened. So if you have kids that are responding even as small as 2.1, you can magnify that by 10 times, 50 times, because nobody wants to talk about any kind of sexual violence, or again, Caleb talked a lot about how people who are in the life that have been exploited and trafficked for years and years feel like they're damaged goods. So they don't have necessarily a high self-confidence, to say the very least. So what can we do with it? We know exploitation and trafficking is high in northern Minnesota. Do we know why? What are some reasons do you think that we're higher here than, say, in the metro area?
The courts,
The courts?
yeah.
Less opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
native groups.
I know one of the biggest factors, Caleb touched on it, is the lack of housing. So we have a very high percentage of people who have experienced homelessness and are experiencing homelessness on a regular basis. And when you are in rural communities, typically there's not a lot of shelters available. For kids who are being exploited and trafficked, if they're under the age of 18, even here in Itasca County, we have Grace House. If they are under the age of 18 and there's not an adult with them, they're not allowed to stay at the shelter by themselves because they're considered an unaccompanied minor. So even somebody who's being exploited, they, might have a run-in with law enforcement and they say, hey, we can bring you to Grace House. And of course, they've already told them, how old are you? I'm 18. Oh, great. Then you meet the criteria. We'll take you to the shelter. But we need identification. We need to run background checks, all that kind of stuff. So there's not a lot of shelters. What are some other socioeconomic factors that you can think of that might cause us to have higher incidences here?
Drugs and alcohol.
Drugs and alcohol. Typically what we see more often is the kids not necessarily having the issues, but the parents having issues with drugs and alcohol. So toxic or dysfunctional family life, where kids are actually exploited by their parents to support their habit. We've had kids that were exploited who they would bring home, they might be part of a girls and boys club where they bring home a backpack of food to help sustain their family, and they've had their parents steal these donated foods and sell them to get money to buy drugs and alcohol. So one problem that we see in Itasca County that is huge and that can lend itself to our kids being at higher risk is, again, the shelter, the dysfunctional family life. So kids are couch hopping like nobody's business. And just like the girl in the video, oh, I'm going over to Jessica's to study, or I'm gonna stay overnight at so-and-so's. We have a lot of teens and youth who don't have strong parental figures in their life, or their parents, maybe they have a single parent, they're working all the time, they're not necessarily being supervised. Or things are just really rough at home, and they're not safe at home. Maybe they're being physically abused or sexually abused by a parent. They will just run and sleep on whoever has a couch available. And those youth and teens are at super high risk, especially when they're staying with other teens. Maybe somebody is 18 and lives on their own, and yeah, I got a couch you can sleep on, but here's the trade-off. So what is the answer for how do we address this issue, but how do we make kids know that there are resources available? How do we start from a proactive measure at an early age and help kids realize the value of their worth? Just like with traffickers exploiting vulnerabilities, you have predators who groom their victims, but they're exploiting the exact same thing. Vulnerabilities, whether it's a lack of self-confidence, whether it's a lack of money. They have an innate ability to circle in and hone in on what makes this person vulnerable and how do I exploit it. So one initiative that Mark and I are involved in, along with the Itasca County Attorney's Office and Itasca County Probation, is a program called Let's Chat, Getting Real About Sexual Violence. So that program is a curriculum that we developed that's targeted at middle schoolers, particularly 7th and 8th graders. We go in and talk to them very frankly about, all right, so this is the age when you're wanting to date and you're going through puberty. We actually show them a video of a convicted sex offender who, help me out here, Mark. He
had a relationship with 2 other women that were under the age of 16 and were not of age of consent, and he got convicted for the sex crimes, and it showed the day in the life of going through the courts and going through probation and what it did to his family. And for those of you that are older like me, remember when Thistledew was here, the experience of going to Thistledew, and basically what his life looked like from start to finish during that process.
And so it's a very realistic look, and it's got the actual audio from this young man who was convicted and had his life changed completely. But it's somebody who the kids identify with automatically, because it's somebody who, I was an offender. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. So the whole idea behind Let's Chat is helping kids realize what is a healthy relationship and what's not a healthy relationship. It's helping kids realize that if you take a photograph of your girlfriend and you send it to another friend and they send it to somebody else, you can be charged with distribution of porn. So we're trying to help kids on both ends. One, make sure that they don't become a victim of sexual violence, and 2, make sure they don't become a predator or somebody who gets convicted of those crimes. And every year we alternate schools, and actually this winter and spring we're coming to Bigfork with Let's Chat. It'll be 2 years since we've been in Bigfork. We do invite parents and people from the community to come to those presentations, which we now do both live and virtual because of COVID. But really we're looking at issues that are beyond what we think is causing kids to get involved. And most often, the one common denominator that you've heard over and over again tonight is it doesn't matter what their situation is. If somebody is going to prey on them, they're looking for what is making them vulnerable. Mark and Caleb both talked about the dangers of phones. We hear in another presentation where teenagers talk about having the pure and innocent Facebook page, where it's, all good stuff, and then they have a second account, more of a slutty account, where they're exchanging messages. You don't know who they're talking to. They don't know who they're talking to half the time. So it's up to us as a community to be looking out for kids who maybe don't have a strong or a healthy family life, kids that you think might be potentially a victim, and rather than focus on, well, I think they're going to get into drugs, or they're acting this way, or something that makes you concerned about their safety. Most often, the best way you can help prevent a child from getting wrapped up in exploitation or trafficking or even becoming victims of sexual violence is by caring. Caleb, you talked about that too. As a community, we need to watch out for one another. And we especially need to be watching out for the kids because they can be on the phone with somebody who sends them a picture and, oh, they're really cute and they're the same age as me and we have all this in common. And then they decide to meet up at a shopping mall and here the person they've been talking to the whole time is a 40-year-old white married man with 3 kids. That's how things happen. There's a grooming process that's involved. So I'm going to stop there because I think it's time to open things up for question. And I'm going to,
Go ahead.
oh, one last thing. So we have a group that is called CASE, Communities Against Sexual Exploitation. It was a group that it was super active in helping provide education and information and conferences on sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. We are looking to revive that group. We had a lot of the core leaders that moved out of the area or retired or just didn't stay active. There is a card on the back table that has our address on it that explains about CASE, but it also lists survivor kits. If you guys want to help us out locally and help serving victims, we put together survivor kits that are given anytime we meet with a victim of sexual violence, whether they've been trafficked, exploited, sexually assaulted, stalked, whatever. And it's full of full-size personal care items, fleecy socks, a little tablet with a pen or a pencil, but some things to make them feel good. Because especially if we're meeting up with them, they've just been assaulted, they want to feel like somebody cares because they feel like they're very ashamed of what happened. We are doing a drive right now to fill a bunch of survivor kits. So if you're interested, there's a list on that card of all the different items that we're looking for. You can call our agency if you want to drop off stuff. We can make arrangements for that. The one key thing, we get this call a lot, which is I have a whole box full of those small shampoos and conditioners that you get when you stay at the hotels. Can I donate them? Please do not. And for one reason, anyone who's been exploited or trafficked, most often, and it depends on where you're at in the state, but most often that happens in motel rooms and hotel rooms. So those travel size containers of personal hygiene items actually can trigger victims that have been victimized in motels and hotels. So we're looking for full-size bottles. We want kids, youth, adults to know that we care, that we have services available. I didn't even cover our services, but basically we do have a crisis hotline that's open 24/7. We do provide all sorts of legal, medical, prosecutorial advocacy and assistance. We basically walk alongside victims, provide support to them every step of the way, let them know what their reporting options if they want to report assaults or want to get law enforcement involved. So that's really our role, is to believe them, to walk alongside of them, to get them the support and the services that they need. Now I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to turn it back over to them.
Just a little bit of information for you tonight, huh? But vital information. Thank you guys so much for your honesty and just your willingness to come and share with us. At this point, we're gonna transition into our Q&A time. And so I'm gonna turn off the recording and